it's obviously coming and taking much more importance now as we've now coming into level 2 and people are wanting to get things up and running. But you know, it's great too, isn't it, the fact that we're in level 2 now, and we have this added freedom that we hope you're all starting to enjoy. And to all you, how much people popped out and had that little treat that you've been pining for over the last sort of 6 to 7 weeks. But it certainly is nice too to be able to connect again with friends and the extended family, and really looking forward to this weekend to catch up with some of ours, and spend a bit of quality time together with some friends as well. So yeah, some great stuff coming forward. But for this webinar, we thought, you know, things are moving fast as we've travelled into Alert Level 2, and there's a number of opportunities that's presenting us in delivering support. And I think it's important that we are ensuring that health and safety is to the fore and place. And we thought within this session today, it was going to be a great opportunity to bring in a sport that's done some fantastic work and really helping their sport get up and running. And that's through tennis, and Tennis New Zealand have really led in many ways the work that they've done around the health and safety planning and the contact tracing systems, and really worked really closely with their regional sporting bodies that has helped their clubs out as well. And also, so we've got Jenny Fitzmaurice, who's the head of participation and coaching from Tennis New Zealand, has come to share a lot of the work that she's put in place and Tennis New Zealand have put in place. And we've also got Richard Gordon back from Give Some Sheet to answer some of the many questions that are getting posed to Sport Wellington at the moment, because there is a lot of information getting placed out there. Things are happening fast. And I think it is important that we do have that degree of clarity as we do try to shift and transition into the sport, the delivery of sport. So Jenny, and we also have our own Roger Thompson, who's going to actually facilitate a discussion as we go through this session. So Roger, I just welcome you on board, if you're there.
Thanks, Mark. Yep, thank you.
Cool. And yeah, so Jenny, thank you very much for coming on, and Roger, thank you very much too for the time that you're putting into this area. I know it's dear to your heart at the moment as well. So yeah, I'll just pass over to you, Roger, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So what I'll do in a moment is pass to yourself, Jenny. So thanks for joining us, and then just for everybody on the call, I just want to really encourage you to fire through your questions in the chat function. Yeah. So Jenny will take us through the tennis world. So yes, from an NSO perspective, but I guess probably what we all really want to hear is how is this happening in the real world on the ground? What has tennis learned, particularly because you went live, so to speak, at Alert Level 3, as did golf. So we're really keen to hear your world, particularly locally, and then we can think about how that's relevant to our worlds. I've been on 2 calls this morning, one with 8 RSO CEOs, some of the biggest sports in the region, and then secondly, I just chaired the regional response group, and we're getting a lot of consistent questions through. A number of them have been answered at previous webinars, Richard, and so we won't be surprising you with them, but it will be a matter of probably reiterating them for what is quite a big audience today. You know, things like when a sport rolls into a council facility, whose responsibility is it to make sure that the appropriate contact tracing system is in place, i.e. both. But we'll come back to some of those questions that have been pitched in the past, just for this audience to take away. So I might just hand it to yourself. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, ko Jenny Fitzmaurice, tōku ingoa. Kei Tamaki Makolo, aho e noho ana. Ko te tenahi Aotearoa aho e mahi ana. My role is Head of Participation and Coaching. Big thanks to Wellington, to Mark, Roger and Paul for the opportunity to contribute today. Like I said, being a non-contact sport and most held outside in large open spaces, tennis has certainly had its advantage during COVID-19 outbreak. And I guess our biggest learning and our biggest success began 2 months ago. So if you can imagine pre-lockdown life when we were all just happily bumbling away in our own worlds, all of a sudden we had to quickly communicate and quickly collaborate and make some pretty fast decisions towards the middle to end of March. So collaboration and communication will be the 2 things that I'd really like you to take away from today. So wind the clock back to March, we arranged an emergency meeting with the CEOs of the 6 tennis regions, primarily just to discuss stopping national and local competitions to avoid large groups gathering. And since then, we've had twice weekly meetings with those CEOs, and we've also included managers of the major tennis facilities around the country as well. So they've been held via video with Tennis New Zealand staff, CEOs, facilities managers, just a chance to just chat, just connect, chat, ask questions, make some big decisions if we needed to, get some clarity if we needed to, but really just a forum to just touch base and keep in touch. We've also hosted throughout this last 8 weeks regular Zoom calls for coaches for exactly the same opportunity, just to check in and connect with one another as well as with Tennis New Zealand to see if they can get a handle of, you know, what's going on in their world. And we've also had regular calls with, there's about 20 or more local support staff who don't actually work for Tennis New Zealand, but they are delivery partners in regions and associations, and their key role is supporting clubs and coaches locally. And I know another big piece of collaboration that my CE has been part of, Julie Patterson. There's a bit of a self-formed group of NSO CEOs, and they've sort of got together and communicated pretty regularly, giving each other some support, NSO to NSO. And I know, especially in the early days, that was really, really beneficial, and they've supported each other greatly. So ultimately, everything that Tennis New Zealand's done over the past 2 months, whether that's producing resources, offering support, communicating to the community, it's all come about through consultation with all of those groups. And any directives have always had the support and the buy-in from other stakeholders. So groups within tennis have felt like they're part of a conversation and nothing's catching them out by surprise, you know, just being announced out of the blue. So that's been a really important part of collaboration. And by working really well like this, it's obviously helped our communication. So by working really well together with all those different stakeholders, it's made the sharing and the distribution of any information really, really easy. Because stakeholders have been engaged in the creation and the discussions around communications, they've been really proactive in on sharing and forward sharing any news or updates or resources right down to club and coach level. So I'm relatively, 99% confident that every tennis club and every tennis coach has got comms over the last 8 weeks. Whereas 6 months ago, if you'd have asked me that, I'd say probably 50% of people might get their MailChimp newsletters or their updates, and the other 50% might just hit delete or never get it in the first place. And even if we haven't had anything to release, we've still made sure that we're communicating really regularly. So via Facebook, MailChimp, like I mentioned, direct email, Zoom calls, basically just to tell the tennis community that we're working on stuff and to give people confidence and to manage expectations as to when to expect more information. And a good example of that was, all the days are a bit of a blur, but whenever the PM said, right, we're moving to level 2, or here are the guidelines for level 2, a simple Facebook post that said, excellent, we've acknowledged that level 2 is coming, we're really excited about what that means for tennis, and we'll be back in touch. What that did is limited the thousands of questions that we could have got, with people going, do you know, are you working on it? Can we play tennis yet? So we sort of preempted any questions, just with an acknowledgement, we don't have anything for you yet, but great news, and we're working on it, and you can expect it on Monday or on Wednesday or in a week's time or in a day's time. So that's really, really helped. So what have we done? Back to the actual, tangible things that you guys can hopefully take away. And I want to say that everything I talk about today and everything I'll share with you and everything that's on our website is really free game for any of you. If you would like to rip it off or copy and paste and lay your sport or your environment over the top of it, you're very, very welcome to. And I think that's been a proven amazing collaboration for these past 8 weeks, that everybody has shared stuff really openly and said, yeah, take it, use it, take it, do what you need with it. So when we knew we were going to level 3, and when we had the guidelines for level 3, we did 3 things. We created a safety plan for clubs based on the WorkSafe plan. We created a contact tracing tool, which used FormStack and our club administration IT system. So we already had something in place that we could use. So we might have had an advantage compared to some sports. And we created posters and signage so clubs could display really clearly to people using the courts what the go was. Only 75 clubs out of 400 odd opened at level 3, most not feeling confident to open, or they weighed up all the effort versus the benefits and just decided not to open. But level 2 preparation has been much more intensive and actually more complex, just because there's so much more freedom at this level, which ironically makes things more complex. So I'm just going to share my screen now. All right. So you should be able to see the Tennis New Zealand website at the moment. If someone can give me a confirmation of that, because I've lost the video of you all.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's great. So ahead of alert level 2 kicking in, we updated the contact tracing tool. That's the first thing we did. So previously it was designed for bubble play only. So what we've done now is make it a little bit simpler for people to check in, multiple times throughout the day, for instance, if you're a coach. So you can select your venue, so that this talks to our back end sort of administration system. And then you can register what you're there for. So are you there to work? Are you there for private play? Are you there for a group coaching session? Are you there to mow the lawns, or to check the meter reading, or to replace bulbs in floodlights? And then quite simply, it just captures name and phone number. And that's because if you're a member, the club will automatically have more details of you already. And if you're a casual player, actually, when you come to book courts on a casual system, we're capturing more data, like email address and everything like that. So we just kept the high level stuff to begin with. We wrote a new safety plan. That was a joy. And I'll give a shout out to Tim from Tennis Central, based at the Renoff Centre, for helping a lot with this. I don't know if he's on the call, but I want to acknowledge that. So this safety plan was completely new for level 2, and we ditched the level 3 one because the level 2 one needed to incorporate coaching businesses, coaching operations, club programming, not just recreational play between bubbles. So this is what we took from the WorkSafe template that's online on the Sport New Zealand website, but we just really tennisified it. So planning ahead, what clubs need to do in advance to open, like a deep clean of the clubhouses, making sure staff and volunteers and club administrators have all been briefed and inducted appropriately and they feel comfortable and safe to return. Then things like access, so what can the members do? What are you going to open? Are you going to open the toilets or not? Things like signage, cleaning and hygiene, equipment. So a great example there is if you're returning back to a tennis club, you don't really need the umpire's chair on the court, so just store them somewhere else for now, because it's one less thing to clean. So take away anything that's really not necessary. And then we incorporated all the coaching practices and what the coaches are doing to keep themselves and to keep their clients safe as well. Lots of equipment sharing, obviously, usually in coaching. So some adaptations made there. Parents dropping kids off, can they stay and watch or not? Considerations to be made there. So the purpose of this safety plan is that a club or a coach can go through this as a checklist, and they can clearly publicly state what they're doing or what they're not doing, so that a member of the public or a member of the club can feel confident in their decision to go to that venue. We also created some posters. So this has been these have gone down really well. So we've done, this is like a general public play safe guideline. So don't come if you're sick. When you do arrive, don't touch other people's equipment. Try and book in advance. Keep 2 meters away from everybody. Don't touch stuff. Take your rubbish away with you, etc., etc. So we've used obviously the government branding for that, but overlaid specifically to our sport, the content. And then we added 2 more posters as well, which it's a bit more of the public confidence piece. So this is for clubs to proudly say, this is what we're doing to keep you safe when you arrive at our club. And we've done the same for coaching businesses as well. So, we're a safe coaching business, we're a safe coach. We're keeping away from you, we're doing contactless lessons, and we're contact tracing. And then the last and probably biggest thing we've done is drilled right down into what alert level 2 means for tennis. So we've got a whole page dedicated to just alert level 2. And you can see these black boxes here on the screen. It goes through, you know, from the top level of what the government call alert level 2 and what the government are doing. The Tennis New Zealand measures is just, for instance, we're going back to the office next week, but only on a half staff. Like the coaches won't be in the office, they'll just be on the court and working from home. But then the recommendations and the scenarios are very tennis specific. So a club can open these up and see, oh, okay, for contact tracing, this is what it means for tennis. And for cleaning and hygiene, this is what it means about the club room, the toilets, the changing rooms. And for gatherings, so, you know, for a private lesson, a gathering isn't a problem because it's only the coach and one other person. But what about midweek ladies? What about club social evenings where 30 or 40 people might turn up? How do we as a club operate in that environment? So there's all sorts of scenarios here that would hopefully answer the club or coach's question about how to operate. So all of these resources we released on Wednesday night. Hang on a second while I just turn my screen off. So we released them on Wednesday night, and we followed up yesterday with a Zoom call for club representatives, just for a 30-minute FAQ session. You know, you've had a 24 hours or so to digest the resources, have a chat. If there's anything we haven't answered, then please ask. And lots of people submitted questions ahead of time, which is really helpful to be able to structure the meeting a bit more efficiently rather than it just being an open floor. But over 60 club reps called in, and it really did help them have confidence in those little nuances and what happens if 12 people turn up for a midweek social session. So I could confidently say, well, you know, maximum of 10, so split them into 2 groups of 6 or a group of 8, and the other 2 play singles, and you know, that's your bubble, or that's your the group or your gathering, and job done. So it really gave them some good confidence. And like I said, any of the resources I've just showed you, especially those scenarios or the safety plan, you're very welcome to access those if you would like to. And I think just to summarize, so biggest learning is back to what I said at the beginning: communicate well and communicate often, even if you've got nothing to say. So it just saves you having to deflect hundreds of questions about the same thing. If you can preempt any questions you might have, and just simply acknowledge that you are working hard behind the scenes to get ready, whatever that might mean for your sport or your club, and set a fair timeline as well, and manage people's expectations. So somebody might want the information tomorrow, but actually you've got a few processes to jump through, and you've got to sign a few things off or get clarity from things like council, for instance, which realistically takes a while. So be firm, but be fair and be transparent, and just communicate as often as you can. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. That's not only insightful but also inspiring. And obviously, tennis and golf did a huge amount of work a few weeks ago. But interesting, Eva, as you said, that 75 of your clubs sort of chose to start operating at that level out. I think it was 400, wasn't it? So that's, again, just a really interesting insight. So what we'll do is I'll just encourage everybody to send questions in. My colleague Megan will read them out in about 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll start working them through for tennis. But just for now, what I'll do, Richard, is I know that a number of questions that were submitted prior through the registrations. So I might, just to mix it up a little bit, just ask you if you wouldn't mind just taking the audience through those questions and just your thoughts to those, and then we'll go back to tennis, Megan, and bring the questions. So Richard, just over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. And look, I'll just echo that and say, Jenny, and tennis, that's fantastic what you've got there. I think that's a comprehensive system you've put in place, and well done for that. Look, I've got a number of questions that have come through last week or so, and before I start running through them, I thought I'd preface my answers with just saying that this is still a moving feast. There are a lot of grey areas out there still that we don't have the answers to. And we are seeking clarification on an ongoing basis. In addition to that, each NSO should be or has already created specific guidelines for their sports, and the answers I'm giving today are really generic and shouldn't be seen as specific advice for a specific situation. And just the overarching thing here is still safety is still the number one priority. We shouldn't be looking for loopholes to try and do what we want to do or because it's easy to do it. So I think before I answer the questions, it might be helpful to run through a quick summary of the requirements for sport and recreation at level 2. The 10-person gathering applies. That is the major difference between the webinar last Friday and this week. That applies both to indoor and outdoor venues and facilities, and it includes players, spectators, officials, and support staff. Now, when you've got a large venue with multiple fields or courts, you can have multiple gatherings, one gathering per field or court. I saw a question through on the chat earlier around, can we just rope off or partition a field or a court and use half of it? The advice from Sport New Zealand is no, it's one gathering per field or per court, and you must still follow the distancing between gatherings. So that's 2 meters at all times. Another requirement is that contract tracing system that we've been through. The Sport New Zealand have also released what contact tracing information organisations need to gather. It's date, time in, and also time out where possible, the name, address, phone number, and email of participants. And then they also recommend, because organisations are gathering information and there are privacy ramifications, short privacy statements included. I'm just putting it in the chat now, which everyone can copy paste for their own purposes. Other requirements are that services and equipment are means where possible. Personal hygiene practices are in place, and it's largely down to individuals, and stay at home where sick. Some other recommendations that they've made is physical distancing, 2 meters where obviously in some contact sports, that's important, and just to minimize contact where possible in those situations. At-risk participants will need to take extra precautions. And any shared equipment should be minimised. Additionally, they've said club rooms can open, provided workplace requirements, which at this stage for a club rooms that serves food and drink is everyone has to be seated, separated at least 2 meters between tables, and single server, so one person each table. So if I run them through the questions that I've got here, give me 1 second. So the first question I've been given is, what's the difference between sport clubs that need to meet level 2 restrictions in businesses? And there's very little difference here. Sport New Zealand obviously have released their guidelines. The Health and Safety Act applies to all businesses or persons conducting an undertaking, which is probably everyone on the call. So there's very little difference between a sports club and a business. You have to meet the guidelines. WorkSafe, I think there's been a link put into the chat already, have released excellent guidance recently around operating safely at level 2, and it's applicable to both businesses and sporting organisations. And it's a very long page about what you need to think about and consider when running sport at level 2, and I believe that link is further up on the chat. There's a lot of helpful practical advice in there. It's not too different from Sport New Zealand's advice. It's still contact tracing, physical distancing, good hygiene practices, similar. There's a fantastic safety plan template in there as well, which I'd really recommend everyone has a look at. So that guidance there from WorkSafe is really helpful, and you should all be having a look at that. Next question, do we open changing rooms? That's a very good question. I think you can, as long as you've got the proper plan and procedures in place. So that's, everyone entering and exiting should be sanitizing their hands, no intermingling of groups. If there's multiple teams using changing rooms throughout a day, they'd have to be staggered, and there would have to be some sort of sanitization of commonly touched surfaces between the groups. Choke points such as the entrance would need to be monitored to make sure that we aren't breaching physical distancing or mingling between gatherings rules. And with all of that, it might be easier to try and encourage people to turn up already changed and not use changing rooms at all. But so long as all the guidelines are met, yes, you can open changing rooms. Next question, what do large inter-school events look like in level 2? Can we even have an event with 1,200 primary school children and their supporters together? Now, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on how sports is being applied at schools. I do know that for the gathering rule, educational facilities are excluded from that. So that's why kids are going back to school. I just say that we shouldn't really be looking for loopholes as to how we can deliver sport and recreation at the moment. Theoretically, someone could make the argument that it's an educational facility and therefore we can have a gathering of more than 10 and play sport there, but I wouldn't be going anywhere near that. I'd say, we've got to stick to the no big events, no gatherings above 10 for sports outside of, what is normally happening during a school day. And I'd say schools would be struggling to have after-school sports if they're going to have gatherings of more than 10. I'd say that's a no-go still at this stage, but I'd hope for some clarification coming out there. Certainly big events, inter-school competitions and things like that is not on at this stage, unless they can meet the gathering limits of 10 per field or court or whatever it is. Next question. I'm looking for clarity on bike and run group training and distancing. Sport NZ guidelines are not explicit. If details are noted for contact tracing, then what distancing is required between group members? 1 metre, 2 metre, can it be closer? The Sport New Zealand guidance is where possible 2 metres physical distancing. I'd say that is possible on a pack run or pack bike. Yes, you might not have the advantages of being very close together in terms of slipstreams, but it is possible to have 2 metre physical distancing. And so I would say yes, on a pack run or pack bike, you have to stay 2 metres away from other participants. And again, the limit of 10 applies, and someone in that pack run or bike will need to take everyone's contact details. Realistically, how can we meet all health and safety standards when delivering in the community space at level 2? The risks that the boards and general managers, CEOs have to manage are huge and will find to be passed on in this uncharted minefield. That's a great question. Health and safety and the Health and Safety at Work Act is the benchmark and is the legal basis for a lot of what organisations are going to have to consider and put in place. And that's all about mitigating and eliminating risks. So the standard that organisations are going to be held to is, did you mitigate or eliminate risks where reasonably practicable? Now, what I mean by that is practicable means possible to be done, and reasonable doesn't necessarily mean doing everything humanely possible to manage a risk. It's just what similar organisations would have reasonably done in the same situation. So the answer to that is, if you're comfortable that your organisation can deliver sport and recreation while, one, following the Sport New Zealand and government health requirements and guidelines, and second, your national sporting organisation's guidelines, then I'd say that would be enough. Obviously, that's not specific advice for every specific situation. And if you're not comfortable, you can meet both of those guidelines. Then I wouldn't be running sport and recreation. As WorkSafe do have the power to investigate any incidents, and if the health and safety duties weren't met by that particular organisation, then theoretically they do have the power to prosecute. I don't know how that's going to work in practice, as the questioner says, it is an uncharted minefield at the moment. Next question, are you able to have more than one group of 10 in a venue if you have a specific area to physically distance? Yes, is the answer to that. Certainly outdoors, each field or court in a setting where there are multiple fields or court can be used by, well, one field equals one gathering. So if you had 5 fields, you could have 5 gatherings of 10, one per field, so long as there's no intermingling and physical distancing between the gatherings is in place. Now, it was a little bit unclear as to whether this would apply to indoor venues that have multiple courts. I have seen advice on Sport New Zealand's mass gathering guidance that suggests the answer is also yes, indoors, so long as physical distancing is maintained, care is taken at choke points at entry to the venue, and the other requirements are all in place, such as contact tracing and personal hygiene and all of that. Indoors, I would certainly be looking at staggering arrivals and departures to make sure that we're not having everyone turn up at once and that there's no intermingling between gatherings of 10. Within those groups of 10, is contact able to be made if all of the 10 are known to each other? Simple answer to that one is yes. And for example, in a contact sport, even if they're not entirely known to each other, as long as contact tracing is in place and contact is minimised where possible, yes, contact can be made as long as it's a contact sport. If it's not a contact sport, I'd be minimising and staying 2 metres away where possible. Are you allowed in one venue up to 100 people as long as they can all be physically distanced from each other? Yes, theoretically, if you had a venue where there were 10 courts and you could meet all of the guidelines around contact tracing, I won't repeat them every time. Yes, that's possible. But it would the more people you get into a facility, the more difficult it is to meet those guidelines. What are the expectations for schools hiring facilities to outside providers and vice versa? I think this is quite a common question. And I think applies to whenever someone hires a facility or recreation, whose job is it to ensure that the health and safety guidelines are being met? Essentially, it's both parties, both the owner of the facility and the person or organisation hiring the facility. Both parties have duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and it's not a situation where you can just leave it up to whoever owns the venue or whoever is coming in to do all of this. I would really recommend, and echoing what Jenny says, communication is really crucial for us going forward during level 2 and even down to level 1. And I'd recommend that parties in that situation communicate between the two to make sure that the guidelines and requirements are being met in advance of turning up for the period of hire. So as long as both parties are communicating and between them are satisfied that the guidelines can be met, then that's the recommended way forward. Certainly don't just assume that because the field or court or facility has been hired a lot that the other party is going to cover it. I'm interested in solutions for netball trainings where teams usually share courts or train on multiple courts. That's a tough one. I'd just go back to it's one gathering per court. So no, you can't have one team on half the courts and another gathering on the other half of the courts. So one gathering of 10 per court, no sharing. Again, I'd stick to multiple courts just to reduce the chances of intermingling. Stick to one court rather than multiple courts. So that's tough. The only suggestion I've got there is stagger your training times to ensure that you've only got one gathering per court. I think that's all the questions I had, Roger. So I'll throw it back to you if that's all right. There might be a few more that have popped up.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hey, as an old colleague of mine would have said, John Reed, that is rich advice. Thank you. That is excellent what you just took the group through, and we'll come back with some more scenarios and related questions in a moment. So Megan, what I'll do now is I'll just open it up. If you can just pass on the questions, we'll go back to Jenny from a tennis specific perspective, if you will. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. The first question we have for Jenny is quite a big picture one. So somebody has asked, is there anything that when you set up to go back to play at level 3 that you overlooked or learned as people came back to play that you think might be helpful?
The first thing that jumps to mind is probably during level 4 as well, of the general public's desperation to play tennis, to the point where clubs were actually getting their fences cut. And yeah, police were having to be called to Scarborough Tennis Centre in Auckland and a few of the bigger facilities that you can just walk into. And the painful irony of having to say to people, no, tennis is not open right now, you know, rather than embracing people into your sport that don't usually play, that was pretty killer. But I think nothing major. I think that New Zealand generally, you know, we're all good rule followers, and in the main, people knew what was expected of them. As long as you're providing that clarity at the venue through signage, through clear communications with members ahead of time, there's nothing that jumped out and surprised anybody, I don't think.
That's a fascinating insight into human behaviour, Jenny. Usually you see, you know, wire fences being cut on World War II prisoner of war camp movies, not at tennis clubs in Auckland. So, yeah, really interesting human behaviour. Megan?
We have what is tennis's view on what to do if someone doesn't sign in for contact tracing?
Good question, and that's something that came up in the clubs forum we did yesterday a lot, because not all tennis clubs are supervised, so there's not a staff member or a coach or a committee member there, you know, cross-checking bookings with signing in. So it's a trust model. You've got to make sure you communicate clearly that is an expectation. I have recommended to clubs in particular to tell their members, or to make it clear through signage, that they will be spot checking. So they will be doing random spot checks. Whether they do or not is entirely up to them, but obviously it will make people think twice. Yeah, and ultimately, as long as you've, just like Richard said, as long as you've met the requirements by putting the signage up, that's the most you can really do.
We have another one asking, do you have some examples of best practice clubs that you've seen to date and what they've been putting in place to allow return to play?
Yeah, it was really nice speaking with the clubs yesterday. There's one example which I'll give you, which is a really rural example, a really small club up in Northland, who, you know, their members don't have internet-enabled phones, and there's not somebody at the clubhouse, and it's pretty low key. So what they put in place, and I thought, whilst it wasn't, you know, the modern, you know, plan A that we would have liked, it worked really well for them, for a really small rural community. And that was, if people wanted to turn up to play, they had to ring the club president in advance and book in, and she'd give them the yes or the no. And then when they turned up at the facility, they had to ring her again to say, we're here, and she would check them in. And then when they finished their game, they had to ring her up again to say, we're leaving. So it's a really good practical example of someone just adapting and making it work for them. And the second example I found out at about 30 minutes before this club call yesterday was Beach Haven Tennis Club on the North Shore. What they've done is they've decided to begin with to keep their club rooms closed, just while they navigate the first few weeks of level 2, to see if they, you know, control what you can control, and don't think you have to do everything at once. You can certainly stagger. So they've decided to keep their club rooms shut for now. They have already pre-allocated their membership into groups of 10. So for instance, they run sort of 2 or 3 club sessions a week in the evenings. So those people on a Monday night already know when they turn up, they're in this group of 10 and they're playing on courts 1 and 2. And then the other group is playing on courts 3 and 4. And they've got a curtain that they can pull out to separate the courts, which they're doing. And they've already been down to the club and separated the equipment. So things like balls, any cones, or you know, coaching utensils that they might use, they've already pre-allocated those balls and the equipment to a certain group. So they've really just done really simple but quite effective stuff, and they haven't tried to do everything at once.
Awesome, thank you. And the last, probably tennis specific one, asks, with the situation being so fluid at the moment, how should we as a club prepare for potential changes to group sizes going forward? For example, if we plan for 10 people and in 2 weeks' time it changes to 20 people, this would change our current plan significantly.
Well, I think we all know we had to adapt pretty quickly anyway, the other way around, unfortunately. So the shock of going from 100 to 10 was a real stressful 24 hours. Yeah, luckily tennis hadn't released any guidelines because there were some private providers, especially I know like Football Fix and people like that, who'd already communicated to their database, games are on, and then they're like, oh no, they're not because we can only do 10. So luckily, I'd just say don't jump the gun. I'd say that if it's now's the time probably to make sure that if we go backwards in the alert levels, if we have to restrict things again, make sure you've got at least a vague idea of what you might do if that happens. And if things loosen up a little bit, try now to put a few thoughts down around what you might do in that instance as well. And I think put caveats on everything, on every single document or website page you've got or comms you've got to say, this information is current as at today's date, and it will need to be reviewed at any time. I think people generally are pretty forgiving about the fact that if the government changes angle, all we can do is follow, really. It's not like you are making the decision as a sport. Some people do forget that, so I think you can just reiterate that in any communications that you're following government guidance. It's not your sport making up these rules. So just be really clear with people that things could change.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jenny. Those are all the tennis specific questions we have so far, but we will still be monitoring the chat if people would like to submit any more. For you, Richard, we've had one asking that if you open up the club rooms, does the 2-hour time limit still apply as it does to cafes and restaurants?
Yes, good question. Look, all requirements on cafes and restaurants would also apply to club rooms. So club rooms between now and next Thursday wouldn't be able to open unless they were serving meals as well, and people were coming for the purpose of having a meal and could have alcohol with that meal rather than coming to have a couple of jugs and chill out with their friends. So any requirement that's on a cafe or restaurant would also apply to a club room serving food and beverages.
Awesome, thank you. And then we've had a couple of different questions come through asking the same thing about getting real clarity on whether more than one group of 10 can be active at the same time on a field or an artificial turf or an indoor court, as long as they're keeping their 2-metre physical distancing requirement. Are you able to touch on that again?
Yes, I certainly can. So the PDF from Sport New Zealand states that sports that take place outdoors in a large open area with multiple fields and courts, the requirements on the number of people apply to a single field and court, so long as this can be managed in accordance with other public health guidelines. To me, that means one field or one court is one gathering. However, I will acknowledge that there is conflicting advice on other parts of the Sports New Zealand website. And at this stage, all I can say is it's better to be safe than sorry. As I said, there is conflicting advice. Another bullet point on the mass gathering guidance suggests that all indoor and outdoor facilities will restrict entry to a maximum of 10 people per group, and that more than one group of 10 can be active at the same time, but the 2-metre physical distancing is a requirement between groups. So that they are conflicting with each other, those two pieces, and my advice would simply be, as I said, better to be safe than sorry.
Awesome, thank you. And the last one that we've had come through has been looking for some more clarity on sports delivering into schools or primary schools, and whether they're required to wash down equipment between classes or whether a school is considered to be a bubble. So for example, in this context, a coach may have 30 balls to sanitize, and to wash each of these between each group would be a big challenge. Are they able to just do it at the end of the day or at lunchtimes?
Yeah, great question. Look, I think sport in school currently is a real work in progress as to how that's going to look with such large numbers. I don't think there's any guidance out there at the moment around that. I'm not sure if even there would be that kind of sport in schools continuing while we're in level 2 and the gathering limit of 10 applies. But I'll just go back to what organisations need to do under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and that's simply minimise or mitigate risks where reasonably practicable. So if it's reasonably practicable to get kids to sanitise their hands before and after sessions, and where possible to minimise shared equipment and bring their own equipment if they can, And if you are using shared equipment, it's where it's reasonably practical to wash that equipment. What would somebody else in your position reasonably be doing?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions that we've had come through, Roger.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Thanks, Jenny and Richard. Richard, just one question that it does keep on coming, and it's the old story. Unless we have some big FAQs that are sort of flashing above every community, these are going to keep on coming. Now, one of the big ones is quite simply, again, it came out this morning at a group of councils and sports. So these are big stakeholders, and that is around responsibility for contact tracing in venues that might be council owned. So a council like Wellington City Council have launched the Ripple app, contact tracing app, but it's just whether a sport or any provider of a program or event going into that facility still has the responsibility to make sure they have their own contact tracing system in place. I know you answered this a week ago, but just for the group on the call.
Yeah, I guess that comes back to my point that both organisations in that position have duties under the Health and Safety Act, and look, if you're going into an indoor facility and there's contact tracing at the door, that seems pretty reasonable that both parties wouldn't have to do it in that situation. But if there's any doubt whatsoever around who's tracing what, certainly I would be, as a precaution, taking matters into my own hands, whether I'm the hirer of the venue or whether I'm the owner, and making sure that contact tracing is happening. Obligations are on both parties. And I guess that just comes back to communicate. Just communicate, consult whoever's going to be involved in whatever sport or recreation you're delivering, and make sure you've got that plan in place. So if you've communicated with your stakeholders and users and hirers or the owners of facilities that you will hire, and you've got a plan in place, then that takes out the whole who's responsible for this kind of thing, because you can point to, we communicated with them 5 days out. They said that there'll be contact tracing. We turned up and there was contact tracing, and it was good and it all worked. Whereas if you just turned up on the day without any communication or planning, that's when there is the possibility for things to slip between the gaps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Great advice. Okay, so just to double check, Megan, are there any more questions through the chat function?
Nope.
Okay, thanks, Megan. All right, what I'd like to do is just to close up now, just to finish with a few messages and reminders. But before I do, Jenny, in terms of tennis, I appreciate that any sport world right now is sort of borderline madness as we progress to alert level 2 proper in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. So thanks for joining the call, and just, I know it takes a little bit of bandwidth to prepare for a session like this, let alone attend and listen and contribute. So that was incredibly valuable, the examples you took us through, especially on the slides. And what we'll be doing is making sure we share the tennis IP, which can be easily adapted. There are so many sports that are fortunate when they have an NSO that has staff and capability where they can do this work and parachute it into the regions. But in our country, there are 70 NSOs. And my personal view is probably about 20 that has the capacity to do the great work that you've done, as an example. Whereas with the 50 others, I do believe it's a role that Sport Wellington should perform, and that is just promoting examples that any sport can take and adapt. So we'll be doing that today through our e-newsletter. So thank you very much. Hey, and Richard, thanks for your continued involvement in these sessions. It's just so important. It's great to hear the real world examples in tennis. And then it's great to get, I guess, sort of a legal view. And we are recording this. We'll hold you to every single thing you've said and every piece of advice. Yeah. So thanks for your continued involvement. Just a few final messages. Number one is, I just want to assure the people on the call that Sport Wellington 5 weeks ago established a COVID-19 regional response group. I'm chairing that group. It's a big group, the 8 councils, 3 DHBs, 3 sports to bring the sport voice, Y Central, previously branded YMCA, Wellington Community Trust. And so it's a big group, and we've, as you'd hope, we've got real momentum with collaborating on what are the top priorities right now. We've just met, and a lot of the areas touched on in this webinar, we chewed through between 10 and 11 this morning, and actually a number of the RSO CEOs chewed through between 9 and 10 this morning at an RSO meeting that I chaired. So just want to let you know that we are bringing these issues to the top of the list and really looking to influence and collaborate as fast as possible. Yeah, as we prepare for the, I think, return to play is the right term. Just some reminders. We do have a number of connecting up online sessions every week. So we have one where anybody can dial in at 10 a.m. on a Thursday, and Sporting Z are always there. And given there's so much happening so quickly, as Richard and Jenny talked about a little bit, it's great every week to have the likes of Colin Stone there, regional partnership manager, that gives a real-time update. Yeah, so that's 10 a.m. every Thursday. And outside of that, the team at Sport Wellington, alongside me, we're running connecting up conversations pretty much every second week for primary school people, if I just call it that, speak very general terms. And then there's a secondary school focused one too. So they're really, really important, as well as a separate coaching session. We'll be running webinars every single week. And if you're not signed up, just email us at info@sportwellington.org.nz. So we will send out every Friday afternoon an e-newsletter. And I know we've all got these in the past. We've all deleted them pretty quickly because we're busy. I'm sure you won't be deleting the Sport Wellington e-newsletter every Friday afternoon, because it does have the latest information. And I know that we just want this. We want to understand how things are playing out. And it'll have real world examples like the likes of tennis, where you can click through to those resources, take them and adapt them. So we'll make sure they're Word and not PDF. And just the last couple of things, this is recorded. So if you have people from your club, your organisation that you think, by crikey, there are 20 really good Q&As in that, I want to get them to your voluntary colleagues, you'll better ping them the link after you get the e-newsletter this afternoon. Megan will be sending that out. The very last thing is, on Monday, the Sport New Zealand Community Resilience Fund was launched. And that's all about providing immediate financial relief to regional and local providers in our region and in this region. So you can go to our website, our COVID webpage. Information about that fund is on that page. Again, Megan, who you've heard her voice today, she'll be sending out our e-newsletter this afternoon, and that'll have links to the Community Resilience Fund. We've got 2 staff on standby because everything, we need to move fast, and we've got 2 staff on standby, so you can read the information about that fund that Sport New Zealand took the initiative to establish, which is fantastic. It went live last Monday. It stays live for a few weeks. And then you can email questions into crf@sportwellington.org.nz. We've got 2 staff on standby. They will get straight back to you. So we're looking to be as responsive as we can. So just to finish then, I know that we know that Rich is looking forward to his brunch. We heard that. Just make sure the rest of your day is productive, Richard, before you start thinking about too much about what you're going to order tomorrow morning. Yeah, I know that we're all thinking about this weekend. My 3 boys were up at 6 yesterday morning. I couldn't believe it. It was like a record, and they're all showered and ready to go and see their friends to build a fort and play some cricket at the local park, which is quite funny. So almost some relief for all of us. So I just wanted to say to you all, thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Richard and Jenny. And just have a fantastic weekend with your wider family connecting back in, and your friends. Everybody deserves that to be happening. So enjoy. Thank you, everybody. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you.